You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. When you think of predators in Mississippi, what do you think of? Do you think of coyotes? Probably. What about black bears? Predators? Carnivores? We're going to learn all about carnivores and predators in Mississippi and elsewhere today with Dana Morin and Jacob Dikes from Mississippi State University.
Mississippi Outdoors is sponsored by Entergy Mississippi. Entergy is building a stronger and cleaner grid to power a brighter future and protect our great outdoors for generations to come.
Carnivore. Isn't it a cool word? How about this? The Carnivore and Population Ecology Lab. And we have Dana Morin and Jacob Dikes here on the show from Mississippi State. Y'all welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Glad to be here. Dana, also appreciate you inviting me to tag along on this one. So,
yeah, I was going to say, welcome back, Cotter. You know,
Week 2.
Yeah, glad to have you back from the Mississippi State Deer Lab. And Dana, this is your lab at Mississippi State. Okay, so let's start there. Carnivore and Population Ecology Lab. Big question, what is it?
So it's kind of combining the two areas that I do the most work in. So I'm a carnivore ecologist. I study anything in the realm of carnivore, but mostly coyotes, bobcats, black bears in North America. And then I'm a population ecologist. So what we often really need to know the most about carnivores, and is one of the hardest things to do, is how many are there? How are their populations changing? And so I end up doing some other population level work too, like for turkeys or deer, using similar methods. But my main, I need to work with people like Jacob then when I do that, because my main area of understanding is carnivores. Okay. Yeah. So when you mentioned deer, I thought, oh, okay, now there's the man from the Deer Lab. And earlier when we were talking, we mentioned, the animal side of it and the habitat side of it, right, Jacob? So that's sort of where this relationship is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very tight-knit relationship there.
Yeah. What, from your perspective, the Carnivore and Population Ecology Lab, as it pertains to what you do, like how do you explain how it overlaps and how it meshes?
Well, especially from the extension side of things. I work with a lot of landowners, and very often every one of them think that they have a predator problem, right? Predators are often scapegoated for all sorts of reasons. But mainly for, we're seeing a decline, or we're not seeing the rates of increase that we want to see in our game species. And very often it's not necessarily that they have a predator issue, it's that they have a non-existent habitat. You know what I mean? So when you're, you're putting fawns on a landscape, or even ground nesting birds or whatever it may be on a landscape where they don't have any cover, doesn't matter if you got a predator issue or not, you don't have the habitat they need to thrive. So that's usually where I run into that, is trying to convince people that maybe you don't have a predator issue.
So sort of y'all are able to sort of tag team a conversation, either with a landowner or just a subject from both angles, and kind of tag team it together, I guess, is how that works. Okay. So the lab itself, that program at Mississippi State, what's the history of it? How far does that go back?
So I started at Mississippi State in 2019, so been there about 6 years. Immediately just started working with, I'd done a lot of work on coyotes and bobcats before that, and a little bit with black bears. But when I moved here, then I really kind of started taking off with black bears as well. So it's and had multiple projects related to that, but also then anytime the state wanted help with other things like turkey population dynamics, then I'm always excited to jump in and help with that too. Yeah.
There's quite a few people in Mississippi that are concerned with that turkey population year after year, wouldn't you say? Oh, yeah. It's a big topic. What led you, prior to 2019, what led you to Mississippi State?
Oh, it's a long and winding path. So I'm originally from New England. I'm from Connecticut and Maine. And then I actually did my undergrad at LSU. I wanted to go somewhere warm.
Okay.
And I wanted to go to a big school. I'd grown up in a really small town. And so I applied to a bunch of places, and I ended up choosing to go to LSU. After that, I was in Belize, Central America for a little while. And then I was in San Diego. I did my master's at San Diego State. I worked in San Diego a couple of years because it's really expensive to be a graduate student in San Diego. So I had to pay off some credit card debt. And then I went to Boulder, Colorado. I was working for Colorado State, trapping bobcats there. And then I went to Virginia Tech for my PhD. I also spent a lot of time at the University of Idaho at that time, working in a specialized genetics lab. And then I went to Ithaca, New York for my first postdoc, and then to Southern Illinois for my second postdoc, and then I got the job here. So
Wow.
it is, yeah, it's, I meant winding. Yeah.
I was trying to do the dots in my head,
Yeah, me
Jacob,
too.
as she was talking. New England, and of course South America is in there. Colorado bobcats trapping them. Utah, and Starkville, Mississippi.
I had a pickup truck, my dog, and a U-Haul trailer, and like wherever the job was, that's where I was going to go with.
Oh, that's awesome.
To go find it. So
That really is cool. So, novice question here. You've already kind of touched on it, but from a purpose standpoint and a day to day, what is coming out of the studies there, the Carnivore and Population Ecology Lab, that are really having an impact?
right now, it's a lot of population modeling for bears. So we do a ton of work for different, and we're working with Anthony Ballard here.
Yeah.
But I'm also working with the states of North Carolina, Michigan, Maine, Virginia, Louisiana, Arkansas, and helping out a little bit with some of the genetics from Alabama. So I primarily got really pulled into bears pretty quickly because it's a fascinating system where they're recovering in North America. But there's a tipping point, right, where they recover, and then you have to figure out how to manage them. And
sure.
Knowing population numbers and being able to pick up trends and project potential outcomes of different harvest strategies is really useful. That's the type of work I end up doing.
You use the word, recovering, the population recovering, and that's not just Mississippi, but it's everywhere.
All of them, they were wiped out of most of North America by 1930s. Yeah, and then a lot of other states have done reintroductions or repatriations, moving bears around. So like Arkansas and Louisiana moved bears from Minnesota and Manitoba down to help recover their populations. Mississippi is really fun to work in because this is a naturally recovering bear population.
Okay.
They chose to not do the reintroductions and let the population recover on its own. So it's been really fun to study. But even like North Carolina and Virginia, they were moving bears around, and and it's kind of neat. Like when you think about the areas that bears remained in, like Mississippi was a good spot, a good last stronghold. They ended up in like the Pocosin swamps in North Carolina. They ended up in the swamps here. It's the areas that people weren't farming, right, or logging and farming. And so, so the recoveries have primarily come from there, and then with reintroductions.
So from a habitat standpoint, these black bears, I guess that it was avoiding people is really right. Places that weren't being farmed and that weren't as populated, that's where they remained barely.
Well, it's, and I think that's the issue.
I know there's a pun there, by the way, barely.
Yeah. Well, that's, we run into that with just about any critter you talk about. As land use practices change, we're starting we're getting rid of habitat, and that's the problem and that we're running into. And then a lot of people are pointing fingers at different things instead of managing for habitat. What I often tell people is you got to think about whatever that target critter is, you got to think about what it needs 365 days a year, regardless of what it's going through, what it needs, nutrition wise, reproductive wise, whatever it may be. So I think that's probably one of the biggest issues we got with any critter. And I'd say that's probably the same with black bear, right? Maybe on a larger scale for sure. But.
Yeah. I think predators make decisions very similarly to prey species, and that is that energetic equivalent of risk. So you're balancing starvation versus fear of what might happen or the potential of predation or the potential of harvest. And it's just how you can, what I'm really interested in, what Jacob and I have been talking about a lot lately, is how the landscape features might influence that and how we could use that to our advantage in habitat management to divert some predation pressure and things like that. So.
Yeah. So the black bear population in Mississippi, how would you describe it? Like healthy, robust?
Recovering.
Okay, still recovering.
Still recovering, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still expanding. It's still establishing. We're going to get good population estimates for the southwest corner and most of the Delta. And we'll have estimates by the end of the summer, but like some coarser ones. And then we've gotten better and better at the methods and getting more information. Within the next few years, we'll have some really good estimates, the same as Louisiana, to show what we have for the western part of the state. So,
okay.
But it's Anthony and I've gone back and forth on it. He's convincing me it's a little bigger than I initially thought. Probably, I think what's been really surprising is the Southwest population, I think, is larger than people initially thought.
Southwest Mississippi.
Yeah, Southwest Mississippi.
Okay.
So, Wilkinson County in that area is just amazing bear habitat. And I think the bears were initially establishing themselves in the Delta because they're coming down from the White River Basin in Arkansas. But now the populations in Louisiana have gotten large enough that they're really producing some migrants. And they're coming over to Southwest Mississippi, and that population, I think, is where the stronghold's going to be, and it's really going to take off.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Have you been on the den checks with Anthony and things like that?
I haven't been on with it. My teaching schedule is really rough for March den checks. I've done den checks in other areas, but no, I'm really hoping every year I say I need to get down there with you, and I need to do that.
Chip, did you tell me you had been on one, or you were going on one with?
I went to one like years ago.
Okay.
And the bear like ran off after they darted it.
Yeah.
It was like flooded, and they had to chase after it. So make sure it didn't drown.
Right. Sure.
It's trickier here than it is in the north, where they're maybe a little more torporous and they're less likely to run off. Yeah.
Sure.
So.
My question was going to be, what makes that part of the state attractive to bears? Is it just its location to Louisiana, or is there something about the environment that they like?
I think there's more contiguous forest habitat compared to, I think in the Delta, there's some really fantastic pockets of bottomland hardwood that they can set up in, but then there's just large swaths of agriculture that makes it really tough to move around.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
Sorry, I stole the habitat.
No. You're the expert on this for sure. But I just think it's fascinating.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating.
I do too. And, I got a million different things come into my head as I hear, someone that like you, that's an expert, not just black bear, but in this case, conversation about black bear. And I'm thinking, okay, well, what's a deer hunter thinking? There may be a deer hunter listening to this thinking, well, what difference does it make to me? Like what? And so I'll pose that really to both. Let's say a deer hunter goes, black bear population in Mississippi, what impact does it have on me? I'm a deer hunter. Why should I care? Well, how would you answer that?
And that's always interesting when it comes to predators, because I think that they just always have a target on their back, right? But I don't know if there's a good answer to trying to get at why that should be important to a deer hunter. I think the biggest part with me is just trying to give the benefit of the doubt that most people want to manage the habitat in a way that it's going to benefit most of these critters, right?
Right.
But also the understanding of every critter at some point likely is going to need to be managed, right? So how do we do that? How do we approach that situation to where we make sure that they're not becoming a nuisance, and that we are acting the way that we need to act to make sure they're not becoming a nuisance, feeding bears, different things like that, right? So
Sure.
It's one of those, like just trying to appeal to the better side of things, like, let's manage the habitat in a way that's going to promote these critters.
Right. Well, but then if we take some of this same sort of train of thought and we talk about coyotes, then it's a whole different sort of conversation and questions that other hunters have, and turkey hunters and that kind of thing, right? Like it's a whole different type of conversation about coyotes, mainly because I would think a lot of folks throughout a state like Mississippi, we're much more familiar with coyotes.
Yeah.
We've run into them ourselves more, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, bears and coyotes are going to do the same sorts of things related to deer, right? So they're going to pick off fawns when they come across them. It's, like we see variable rates. I frequently refer to most omnivorous carnivores like bears and coyotes as Roombas. Like they kind of move around the landscape, and they eat whatever their diet is going to be proportional to whatever's available.
That's a
on
great
the landscape.
analogy. Yeah.
So they're, they're going to have, now is that an impact is the question, right? So in Louisiana, they did a study recently where the bear population has become fairly dense, like really dense actually, where they just did the first harvest. And they found that the fawn survival was really low, and the main predator was bears. But the fawn survival wasn't low enough for the deer population to actually decline.
Okay.
So, we found the same thing in a study in Virginia in the last few years. That bears are. So what you're going to see is whichever predator, in my opinion, what the research so far shows is whatever predator is most abundant on the landscape is probably going to eat the most fawns. But that doesn't mean that there's actually a population level impact to the deer because of it. So
Okay.
it's a
And that's where I think one of the most important parts of all of this, one of the reasons why I think this podcast is great, is because it all comes back to education.
Yeah.
There's a lot of just misinformation out there. There's a lot of just innate beliefs, whatever it may be. Oh, carnivore, predator, those are ugly terms or whatever. But like Dana was saying, there's also a level at which it's not additional mortality. You know what I mean? Like, they're not causing population declines. Yeah. And when you manage habitat for one critter, in many cases, you're going to benefit many others. So if you are seeing black bears or something move onto your property, it's probably because you're doing something right, and you are benefiting white-tailed deer or quail or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So
that again, from experts, I think for most folks, it's just fascinating to hear that. Okay, I think what you said, there's not a negative, population impact. You think about the size of population of a predator. It's good for us to hear that. So it's right back to what you said, an education angle for, Joe Hunter, general public.
Well, and there's another component too. In most places, most areas of Mississippi, we have too many deer. You know what I mean? Which is not good, whether you're a hunter and you're interested in large antlers or you're interested in big bodies or whatever it may be. If you get too many deer, they start eating themselves out of house and home. They're running out of groceries. It's literally that type of situation. Predators play an important role of removing individuals.
And they do remove individuals, but I always say, like, I feel like there's always this need to. People say, like, well, what good are coyotes? Like, why do we need them? And my answer is usually like, well, they're not very good at anything, honestly, right? They're so omnivorous, they're so opportunistic that, like, they're not really good at managing any populations. They're just there. They're also just really, really hard to remove. And you can actually start introducing more problems with removals if it's not done at a spatial scale that's appropriate. So I did a lot of work in Virginia for my PhD, and I was in an area where it was a very old deciduous forest in the national forest. There was very few areas where there was very good habitat, usually riparian areas, and a little bit area where they're doing some prescribed burning on ridgelines. And so the coyotes, those territories were incredibly important to those coyotes. So the most dominant groups had those incorporated in their territories. And when you removed a coyote from there, another coyote moved in from another subpar territory almost immediately. Like, it was just this turnover constantly going into these high value territories. So that really got me thinking about, like, well, how do you manage and of course that's where the prey, or where the deer and the turkey and everybody else are. So how do you manage these landscapes to then produce habitat where they're not all just fighting for the few spots that are good, and instead you can maybe divert a lot of activity to these other areas and spread out that predation pressure, spread out the make it more accessible or better productivity for the prey species or the game species, but also have a benefit in that you're going to have less of an issue with predation.
Yeah. And from a research standpoint, if you have the data, then you can make decisions based on the data. I think about that as you were talking, I was thinking about that saying, you can't manage what you don't measure.
Yes.
So you got to measure it so that it can be managed, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then that's also one reason that you hear a biologist talk about diversity all the time when it comes to habitat, is because the more diverse your plant communities are, the structure on the landscape, the interspersion of open areas and grasslands and forest and that kind of thing, it caters to more species. Yeah. It gives them options. And if they've got the options, they're going to make the decisions that are going to benefit them, right? So that's why you hear diversity all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the fancy word heterogeneity.
Yeah,
right?
heterogeneity.
Heterogeneity is like the, variable aspects of the landscape. But there was a great study initially there was a study in South Carolina that found really low fawn survival, and coyotes were the main culprit. And they looked at all of these vegetation metrics, but that were at the scale of, like, the bed site of the fawn. So they said, okay, well, they did NUDS boards and they measured everything within, like, a couple feet of the bed site. And they're like, we can't find anything that suggests that some fawns are safer because of the areas they're selecting to bed in. And then the question was, well, are you looking at it at the right spatial scale? Because a coyote doesn't care about the scale. A coyote's moving at a much larger scale. They're using like 6,000, 8,000, 10,000 acres. Wow. So for just a general home range. So then what you really want to be thinking about is, like, well, what is the scale that's appropriate to manage for? And what they found was that if you looked at the home range size of a doe, if you had more heterogeneity in a doe's home range, then you had higher fawn survival. So there is that landscape aspect that shows that
interspersion of those different habitat types and stuff like that, because you can cause issues by say, if we've got this one really great bedding area over here. Well, if you've just got that one and it's a small scale area, well, now that's a snack for.
It's a bullseye.
It's a bullseye. Yeah. It's a grocery store for
well, not just for one home range, because they'll actually start to align they're very territorial, but they'll start to compete. They compete, right? And so they're constantly pushing their territory lines back and forth. And what you'll find a lot of times is that coyotes and wolves and even bobcats, their territories will kind of align in areas where you have high density of prey. And it's to a benefit to some degree, like wintering yards in the Northeast. You actually have less predation on deer, less interactions of deer with coyotes and wolves, because they're actually interacting with each other more. But it could also be if there's there's that energetic equivalent of risk. You might not care so much about interacting with each other and having these territorial fights if you need the food that bad.
If you need it. The coyotes, Jacob, I almost think coyote's a cooler way to say it. It sounds better. I need to start saying coyote instead of coyote. Yeah. But
I think it depends on where you grew up.
Or
I agree down here, yeah. Okay.
Or if you watched a lot of Westerns as a kid, it was coyotes on the Western. But so in Mississippi, we have one kind of coyote. Like it's one.
Yep. All of North America is one.
It's all one thing.
Yeah. So
even though we see some that on the side of the road, unfortunately, that are big, and then some that are not so big,
Yeah. And I mean, like in the perception of size for me, I always think every time I've had somebody tell me they've seen a coyote, they're like, it's the size of a German Shepherd. And I think there's a trick in our head that like, when you see something and it looks similar, like you kind of equate the size.
Yeah.
I can show you pictures of me sitting on them from trapping and collaring them. They're about 40 pounds.
Yeah.
So like when at the largest. For the Southeast, we do have some pockets in Louisiana where they have higher red wolf ancestry from introgression or from hybridization. And so they'll get up to about 50 pounds maybe there. And when you get farther north, you get some gray wolf ancestry as well in there. And so there were two fronts when it started moving east. One came across the south and one went kind of up around the Adirondacks and the Great Lakes area and came down through New England. And so those ones you can get like a 60-pound coyote sometimes up in Maine, something like that.
That'd be about the max up there.
Yeah.
So a coyote and a wolf can breed?
Yeah, they're very closely related. Yep.
So could a coyote and a dog breed?
Yes. Yeah.
No idea.
So it's kind of a it's physiologically possible. It's usually a behavioral component that deters it. So it's called positive assortment. Individuals will select for individuals that look more like them, so or have the similar traits. And so red wolves, that was actually a big threat to the red wolf reintroduction program, was that they were hybridizing with coyotes, but it was only when there wasn't another red wolf available. So it's kind of like if there's nothing better,
Sure, we'll settle.
But it's not widespread. But it's actually interesting. So we have melanistic coyotes in the east, but we don't in the west. And what they've determined is that is from the early expansion eastward, when there were just a few coyotes moving east and they couldn't come across another coyote to breed with, they were occasionally breeding with dogs. And so that melanistic gene in coyotes is actually from domestic dogs.
How about that?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
That is fascinating.
The color of the coats in the east are gorgeous. Like I've trapped coyotes in Virginia that were like strawberry blonde.
Really?
I trapped one that looked almost like a red fox in coloring, black with like gold mantles, like just really beautiful variation in the colors. They're pretty sandy here. There's one of my students showed me a picture of a melanistic coyote the other day that's from Mississippi. He said the camera was in Mississippi. Yeah. So, but it's a lot more rare than you get kind of in that convergent zone in the Appalachians where they kind of all came together.
Okay, and I'm jumping around here, but you mentioned red fox.
Yes.
So we have red foxes in Mississippi.
It's
What's
a state
that?
mammal.
It is the state mammal?
Red fox is the state mammal.
I didn't know that. Jacob, I didn't know that. Did you know that?
Oh, I'm learning all sorts of stuff.
I'm learning all sorts of Okay, so the red
Some of which I should have known.
But it's the state mammal. Mm-hmm. So what's our red fox population like in Mississippi?
I don't think anybody really knows. So, but Martin Coker would be a good person to get the first answer from. Okay. But yeah, we have trapping records, but we haven't done a study to really get an idea of population size. Same thing for coyotes or bobcats.
Yeah. And I would just say, just from my vantage point, I live in North Mississippi in Tupelo, and we're in a residential neighborhood, and we have red foxes that make their way in, and we've had them in the yard, and and I've even seen at like 3:30 in the morning, the cat's at the door looking at something, and out in the yard's a red fox, and he's trying to eat something in the ground. He does a little jumping thing. It's pretty cool. They're really neat to see. And years ago, there was a family in Amory that lived on a golf course that they had like a family of red foxes that would come to their back step and they'd feed them hot dogs.
Not a good thing to do.
No, okay, so let's start there. Don't feed them hot dogs, right?
Don't feed any carnivores. Yeah, it's a habituation issue. It's I mean, in San Diego, we had a coyote that kept biting people on a golf course, and it turned out it was because, I mean, it didn't keep it. It didn't last that long, but it turned out people had been feeding him hot dogs from the hot dog stand at like the ninth tee. The black bear attack in Florida. I mean, like, it's just I guess we've been dealing with it longer out west, but when I was in San Diego, there was a very active group that was, like an education program, and that feeding animals. A fed coyote is a dead coyote. A fed bear is a dead bear. Like you're going to introduce a problem that can't be resolved without removing that individual. So,
We've had also you hear the stories of, the stray cats, that they're, prey for the foxes in the neighborhood, sometimes the geese, that kind of thing. But again, if I step back and I just look at it from the standpoint of, look, they were here long before I was. And two, from a habitat and a food perspective, that's what's driving their thinking, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. There's nothing super predator or malicious about it. They're just doing what they do, like that's, but yeah, no, and I agree. They were here longer than us, but also we can figure out how to share space, but it doesn't have to be us. And I think it's great that people want to interact with animals or want to have that experience of viewing them, but we have to also respect that they are a wild animal and that they should be left alone too. So.
The curriculum in the program there at Mississippi State, like how many students and what is it a part of, and kind of what are they doing? In my lab, or in your lab. In Department of. So I've got 7 graduate students right now. Okay. Most of them are working on bear stuff at the moment. And then I've got I just graduated 2 undergrad technicians, and I've got 2 other undergrad technicians that work in my lab. So they're doing a lot of genetics work. So I have a genetics lab on campus that's specialized for, it's basically like a forensics genetic lab. And so we can identify individuals from sign they leave in the field. So coyote scat or bear hair or things like that. We can get the genetics from the cells that are left on that and then identify individuals. Yeah. And we use that to build population models or things like that. Very cool. Yeah. Well, and again, I hear something as you talk about that program echoing in my head. It's the same thing I kind of talked about with Jacob and Eric about the Deer Lab and other programs is, somewhere there's someone listening going, wait a minute, maybe a 14, 15-year-old kid going, wait a minute. I can go to school and I can study that and like get a degree and then work. I can do that for a living. Yeah. It's when you're passionate about it, it's a really cool thing, isn't it? I spent like the first 15 years of my career getting to basically trap carnivores and put collars on them and follow them around and hike around outside. It's great. Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. Yeah. Jacob, from a deer perspective, in the perspective of the MSU Deer Lab there where you are, what's the advantage for you, the Deer Lab, the deer population? What's the advantage of a program like this on a campus like this and being able to work with someone like Dana? What's the advantage?
Well, I mean, aside from the wealth of knowledge, I'm soaking all this in right now, but all of these things are interconnected, right? You can't manage one without the other. You can't talk about habitat without, benefiting this critter versus that critter. I mean, they all live on the same landscape. So I think it's really important to look at it like that versus very one-dimensional. Well, if we do this, how does that impact deer? It should be, well, if we manage the habitat in this way, how do different animal populations respond? That's where we're going to get at being more efficient in the way that we manage habitat and wildlife, right? So I think that is working together is where we get it a more accurate answer to all those questions. And it's fun, right? It's just a lot of fun. Yeah. So,
what about from your perspective, the advantage of you're on a campus next to the MSU Deer Lab, sort of the foremost in research, certainly in our state and in much part of the country, so what's the advantage for you in your studies and getting to work with people like Jacob? I knew very little about deer before this. So really? No, working with Jacob and Eric and then also with Steve Damaris and Bronson Strickland before them, right? Like it's been great. It's just, I think of them as prey for the species I study, but at the same time, being able to understand the dynamics, being able to walk down the hall and ask ridiculous questions, like being able to just,
sit down during a break and talk about like, I have this crazy idea. What do you think of it? And pitch those things around and have those actually develop into projects and proposals is really great.
Yeah.
And it never ends either. The whole 2-hour drive up here, we were like, what about this? What about that? Wouldn't it be cool to look at this?
Yeah.
So yes, going back to what you just brought up, yes, being passionate about it. Like I love this every day.
That's what I was saying. It's not just a job.
No, it's not.
Right.
No.
When you get in the car and 2 hours later you're still talking about it, it's it's kind of on the brain, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
That's great though. But that's what it takes, isn't it? I mean, again, not to get, far be it for me to wax prophetic on the show, but the idea that success follows passion.
Yeah.
That's kind of where this is all headed.
It gives you the drive. Yeah.
It does. And that's kind of what I was touching on earlier when talking to like deer hunters or land managers or, I dare say that everybody likes some wild critter or another, right? I think we're just naturally born to like wild animals, right? Or animals in general. And we can do some amazing things. Landowners can do some amazing things that are going to benefit those critters, that are going to help manage the landscape and that kind of thing. And it's really fun and rewarding work to do. Regardless if you get paid to do this or that, it's just fun stuff to do. So that's kind of my appeal when I work with landowners is look what you can do in this place. It's neat.
When you asked about, why would a deer hunter care about the bear population in Mississippi? My first response is, well, I hope maybe you'll have the opportunity to harvest a black bear in the future, right?
And
like become a bear hunter.
Great point. Yeah.
So.
It's one thing we didn't talk about, but and I guess what we're saying is, there was a time when that was always a possibility in Mississippi. You mentioned, up in the 1930s, we've heard the stories of, Teddy Roosevelt and that kind of thing. But so there was a time when that was normal everyday life. You had that opportunity.
Mississippi was beautiful bear habitat. Yeah. It was stocked. Yes.
we talked to a man who has, written a book based on the life of the foremost bear hunter in,
it's a great book.
Yes, that's right. So you read it.
Yes. Yep.
And so, I guess, in other words, if we take a step back, what you're saying is it can be that again.
I don't think, there used to be somewhere around, like they guessed, and this is speaking of Louisiana numbers, but they think there used to be 80,000 black bears in Louisiana before the population was decimated, right? They've got like maybe 1,500 now, and I think they're good with that. Right?
Okay.
They just initiated their first harvest. There's a lot more people now. We use the land in a lot of different ways. So we're not going to recover it to the pre-decline numbers, but we absolutely can establish a population that is going to be sustainable with harvest and manage it that way.
Yeah. This may be a comment that Chip has to cut out, but I was thinking, so if we get 80,000, I might need to open a body shop.
No, I know.
Okay, my side business.
Nobody wants that. It's okay.
Well, and that's where
we can cut that out, but nobody wants that.
That's where that management comes in. That's where that habitat management comes in. As human populations expand, as urban sprawl happens, as we change the way we use the landscape, whether that be grazing cattle or row crop agriculture. We've got to make up for that somehow or another, right? We've got to manage in a way that's going to maybe mitigate the issues that we cause with that kind of stuff, right? Like Dana said, those critters are just trying to do what they do.
Right.
No ill will in there, just trying to do what they do.
Right. And then maybe the last important question I could come up with is football season. LSU plays Mississippi State. Are we still rooting for the Tigers?
No, Mississippi State gave me my dream job. I root for Bulldogs.
Okay. She is now fully Bulldog.
I like it.
Yep.
That's great. Well, thank y'all so much for being here. It's really cool to learn about it. For those listening, you can look it up. It's online. Really, it's a great website. I enjoyed looking at pictures. I can read, but I like looking at the pictures too. The Carnivore and Population Ecology Lab at Mississippi State University. Dana, thanks so much for being here. Jacob, good to see you again. Really appreciate it.
Very enjoyable.
Yeah, enjoyed it. Thanks.
Enjoyed it. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you outdoors.